Dr. Jeannice Fairrer Samani. Thank you very much for joining us here for the Happy Smart City podcast. It's been a very long time coming, very highly anticipated and coveted interview, for lack of a better expression. I'm really honored to have you here with us today. So thank you very much for joining.
Well, it's quite a pleasure and very much of an honor to be asked to speak to you and your audience. Thank you.
Of course, of course. So, the first question for you is, what is your current occupation?
I am currently the managing director of Fairrer Samani Group. We are an IT boutique consulting firm. We provide opportunity to work directly with corporate SMEs on their actual pain points to bring to bear their opportunities, predictions, forecasting, and understanding of archival data as well as primary data, and how to transform that into business intelligence and store it in the cloud.
I look at your profile and I see a mix of the two worlds, right? With the PhD in business, but then at the very beginning, your undergrad was in city planning, city and regional planning. And so your view for me has just been something that's fascinated me, and I've always wanted to have your opinion in how you've seen things change over time. So with your background and the kind of exposure that you've had over the years, how have you seen engineering and technological innovation impact your immediate community through the years?
Well, thank you for asking. Yes, my undergraduate was in city and regional planning, and I also got a dual degree in economics. So that foundation allowed for me to view structure, design, structure being infrastructure, whether it be a political system, an economic system, a physical system, if you will, and to bring that into fold and bear the questions of how and why certain developments are the way they are, who's in business, how did they get in business, and why are they in business? And then to begin to think about those groups of populations that may not have access to certain types of resources, i.e. education, grocery stores, the basic necessities of life quite often. And so I began to ask those hard questions of what comes first, economic development or community development? How are these systems in play that actually somewhat restrict, if not support, which is what they're supposed to do, actual development within communities? So I just really began to ask those questions. And through that, their whole idea of gathering data and understanding the critical questions and the variables that are within the questions, whether it be segmentation, demographics of populations, or whether it be the value that is seen in insurance for someone if they're in a car accident. All of those types of questions actually began to have data points. And as time evolved, we were actually able to curate as well as maintain larger quantities of data, now known as big data. So we can actually analyze that data and have a better sense and understanding of the picture, create a visualization that lends to how we can best build systems and infrastructures that can be sustainable and can get us to the point as a society of having all of the needs met of those individuals, as well as some of their desires. Because quite often, as we know, in business, it's not always based upon need. People don't realize what they need until it's created sometimes, regrettably. But in other contexts, sometimes products are created that aren't really needed. They go beyond the necessity realm. So that is where the two actually meet, as far as looking at engineering from a civil engineering standpoint, or city and regional planning, if you will, to the context of how business is developed and my interest in bringing the two together. And then we bring in a third leg of technology, which I'm sure you'll get to.
Well, now I'm just so interested to understand, just as a follow-up to this one, even though not, it's not part of the original questions. But when you do get into the kind of work that you do, I mean, what does a typical meeting look like? Who are the key stakeholders there?
Well, it depends upon what vertical I'm working in. In most contexts, we're looking at data from the standpoint of product development. So we can do a cross-functional meeting. It's always recommended. At least that's part of our modality of actually gathering data and making sure that the needs of the client are met. So we do cross-functional meetings whereby we bring in the marketing team, we bring in the finance team, we bring in the operations or programming teams, and in some cases, the engineering team. It just depends upon the functionality. And of course, the IT team, the information technology team, especially when it is to go on to a platform, the information is to be curated and then placed into a platform, or a platform is developed and or it's moved into the cloud. So we start with the cross-functional just to get a sense of what the health of the organization is and how we can best meet the needs. And then we go through a process of elimination or addition, if you will. We may, in the case of elimination, we may say, okay, once we've evaluated what areas or what departments or functionality within an organization is needed, then we can actually say, well, we'll focus on, say, for instance, the finance. If they're looking at a fintech situation of actually looking at financial processes and what does that mean? So we can drill down and eliminate some of the other areas, perhaps maintaining operations, of course, and IT, but eliminating the marketing or eliminating additional programming departments. In some cases where we are adding in adding in players or stakeholders, that may include looking at end users, looking at individuals, whether it be a board individual or someone that is a UX that would actually utilize the applications or the system that we are putting in place. So that's where, in the case where we would add in additional players. So that's what the initial assessment,
Yeah.
where it begins. And then we go through an actual architectural design experience where we keep it human-centered design, and we work in-house with our team to prioritize exactly what needs to happen and when, and to build out the actual project plan for the client.
It sounds like the system development life cycle and systems analysis and design, where you go through requirements gathering, and then the prototyping and so forth.
Yes, yes. I like to also think about it from a standpoint of having that structural to work through the chaos, but I truly believe in chaos theory to get to innovation, meaning that you can bring in a lot of elements to actually begin to filter out what is needed and not needed. So I do implement a bit of chaos theory in regards to the actual structure of the process.
Lovely, lovely. So the third one is, considering the technology comes at a cost to the consumer, um, are there any significant economic factors that you think need to be addressed at government level in order to bridge the digital divide?
Oh, where do we begin? Definitely, it's quite often what I have been experiencing in speaking with governments and government representatives around the world, as recent as 2 weeks ago, is that there is still a lack of understanding of the adoption process. They've heard about it, they know it's needed to a degree, but there still is that lack of true knowledge of the benefits and some of the restrictions of various technologies. So in regard to the investment aspect or the economic commitment, they're still unsure as to, I think I'm getting to the response of your where you want to go with this, but it's more of the adoption and adaption. I always think of technology in that regard. The adoption being that there needs to be that opportunity to bring in knowledge, education, awareness, and understanding the actual application and the benefits. And then the adaption of implementation of various technologies, whether they be emerging or existing, to adapt to the existing infrastructure within the government. And then that would allow for improvements quite often, and very much of a monitoring system of whether or not it works or it's being effective, there's feasibility. And that's where we start looking at some of the economic stratas to say whether or not it's feasible. Quite often you need to test in order to see the results and the feasibility from an economic standpoint. It's very difficult if you were to put it on any type of assessment, economic assessment, to actually put it into a simulation without some kind of test. So with that said, there needs to be the adoption, the understanding, the education, the adaption of the actual system or technology in order to assess its viability. And then you can know whether or not it truly has the economic outcome and impact that a government would desire. And of course, having all the stakeholders at the table, which you can't create policy and economic strategy without having everyone at the table.
All right. Right. I mean, I agree with you 100% there. Now, I'd like to talk about the people on the other end of the spectrum. So, the low income homes, and perhaps the lower end of the middle class, where kids don't have as much exposure as upper middle class and well off families and communities. And when you think about the rapid rate of technological advancement, and the cost, I mean, it really comes at a huge cost. How do we bridge the gap there on the issue of digital divide?
Yes.
What can government do there to to just bridge the gap, because it's becoming worse and worse?
Yeah, there's actually a chasm. Initially we were thinking, oh, there's just a gap, and we'll throw education, and we'll say no child's left behind, and we'll bring in STEM education, and everything will be fine and tidied with a bow. I was fortunate enough, I'll tell you a bit tweet here, a short little story, and then I'll respond to the question directly. But perhaps you can see some of the pictorial or the expression through the story. I was attending an event in South Africa where the UN was there, and they were in attendance along with other delegates from the United States in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and also local individuals within the the country, in the country of South Africa, and in particular, the southern part of South Africa. So it was a very, very robust, very prestigious group of people from the country itself in education. So interestingly enough, there were young people there, and there was a young woman that stood up very well positioned in her school uniform, very articulate, gave protocol to everyone that was in the room, and began to say, how can you actually think that we would be able to achieve parity and knowledge of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics if our teachers do not know how to turn on the computer?
That
So
just sent a jolt through my spine. Wow.
exactly.
That is so, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Yeah.
And so with that said, that completely, I mean, and there was silence around the room after she spoke. And immediately someone on the dais began to respond. But all of that to say, if there is not education for the educators, teaching teacher programs to keep them abreast of new technology, not, even to put aside having the hardware, to have the actual computers. You can build computers now for pennies on a dime, and they can be actually created locally. They do not have to be imported from other parts of the world to various communities. There could be kiosks where young people, where communities could gather, not just young people, but generationally could gather in kiosk areas or community centers or hubs, if you will, where they could be programs to actually teach each other, young people teaching older people, and older people giving them history about the culture. And I'm just throwing ideas out here about culture, so the students could actually know that they have a strong foundation. They're just building on a foundation that exists. So that begins, I believe, to fill in the chasm of the digital divide, being able to generationally educate one another, as well as have those teacher teaching teacher programs that teachers can come together and actually support one another. So much education now is on the internet, and I do understand that quite often there are blackouts, there are rollouts, there are brownouts, if you will. There are shortfalls with internet connection, but we all know that we utilize our phones. We find a way in which to connect to the internet, whether it be for long durations of time or short durations of time. But all of that to say, there are resources available. But if we come together as communities of learning, whether they're these hubs or kiosks or community centers, come together as hubs of learning, we can actually support one another, where economically we would fill in the chasm even that much more. So those are some of my thoughts around how this digital divide could actually be not eliminated, because as you stated so eloquently, it's very rapid, it's ever changing. But I do know that many countries are at the precipice of 3G and greater. And with that said, the transmission of digital information can come much further, much faster. And there are companies, that are trying to connect various parts of the world. And I think that there should be competition locally to do that. There are great minds in many parts of the world that generally are not heard or seen. So yes, of course, we do have the larger companies that are well known, but I also believe very strongly that there is localized opportunity as well. And so whether or not individuals are expats and they're going back to their home country, or if they're homegrown and they're actually creating the technology locally, I think the sharing aspect of those community opportunities would help with the underrepresented, the underserved, and those on various economic spectrums.
Now, people will typically wonder, where is true north? I mean, we talk about technological advancement, but that's coming at a cost. We're seeing a lot of mental health come from, all of this consumption of digital media, and a decline in human interaction. So sometimes I wonder, are we building these machines for the sake of building machines, or are we building them for us? Now, the next question really tries to dig at this. So, is there a shortage in the current STEAM graduate supply in America, for example? And when we talk about a shortage of supply, what does that mean? Where are we going?
Well, you've asked me some very, very, very important, you brought up some very, very important points. Number one, as far as mental health and wellness in regard to machines and whether or not we're building them for us or for, I don't know, you could say ... Um, I believe that technology itself, since the beginning of time, and we can go through the evolution of industry, right? From the beginning of the trade industry into agriculture, and agriculture into industrial era, and industrial era into information technology era, where we are today. I think truly that it's a matter of curiosity. And I believe very heavily in the idea of curious intelligence, I call it, and looking at that quotient of our being as human beings, to want to ask questions and want to advance and change lives based upon various techniques, various processes, various products, various things that we actually create. It's curiosity that, so yes, we do build, I believe, we do build products for ourselves quite often. I mean, I could give several examples. We'll just start with just one historic example of the car. So of course, many people walked on foot. That's a direct competition to the car. It got us to a point of the motor on the carriage before an actual vehicle, that mobilized human beings to get to where they needed to be faster than riding on a horse and in a carriage. So that was that sense of, well, how can we get to where we want to be faster? How can we get there safer? How can we carry more people? So again, it's all based upon curiosity. So the mental health aspect of all of that, in looking at machines or technology, is we all need to think about how we can step back and step away at times. I'm sure you may have seen, or some of your listeners may have seen, your analytics on how much screen time you have. I personally became very aware when I was getting notification that I was on my computer 18 hours a day. That was a great concern, especially during the past year and a half.
That is
So
a
I
lot.
began, pardon?
That is a lot.
Yes, but I was working. It was work.
Yep.
But that was the idea, is that we were shut in right? And I was engulfed in my screen time. Was I being creative? Yes. Was I being innovative? Yes. Was I fulfilling some of my curiosity? Yes. I had 20 tabs open at one time, and I'm moving around these tabs and actually gleaning information and then writing about it or programming or creating. So the mental health is where you have to be
I've
able
got
to,
15 tabs open right now.
I believe it. It's our nomenclature, right? That we begin to think about where's the cutoff? Where can we step back and take a walk, or step back and spend time with family, or step back and have a conversation? And I mean by step back, step away from the screen, yes? So we have to be conscious and conscientious of our curiosity. And it's not so much put limitations on it, but it's to say, what else can we bring in to utilize more parts of our brain? So I go through this whole transformational exercise of utilization of multiple parts of my brain and thinking I can be creative. My curiosity can bring about creativity. My curiosity can also feed into my agility to do other things, to take a walk, to go to the gym or whatever. My curiosity can bring about the idea of maybe doing something with my hands and being creative in some way. So that allows for us to be happier and healthier people and much more well-rounded. And we're still creating, we're still building, and yet technology is still a part of it, because it's not just fingers on the keyboard, or it's not just an algorithm. It's more of what else can you do. If we're looking at artificial intelligence and thinking about the larger scope of where we are with quantum theory and how much we're actually processing information, information can continuously be processed. It's just processed in a different way. And all of that is to say you can do it in a very healthy way. I really, when you asked me that question, I was very intrigued about the health aspect, because um, as of late, many people are thinking about the ethics around technology and where AI, artificial intelligence, is going, and based upon ethics and faith and the engineering aspect of quantum theory and all of these sorts of components that are in our society. So it's a very timely question. It's a one that we should be cognizant of. And we should actually, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we should actually be aware of our personal being. Where exactly are we, and how much time are we spending on the screen? And can we move some of that curiosity that actually stimulates us into other aspects of who we are?
You know,
Now, you talked about the shortage of supply also, but
of course, yeah.
I'm sure you had other questions.
No, please do address that as well.
Well, the shortage of supply, as far as looking at technology or where we are as human beings and individuals, actually human capital. Um, yes, there are shortages of underrepresentation. I believe that technology is for all, and everyone should be able to glean opportunity for the viability of what and the benefit of what technology could bear. I spoke in Hungary for the international, it was the Global Information Technology Council. So I was very honored to be on a panel there where I spoke about agriculture and how artificial intelligence actually can increase the yield of this farming community. It was actually a cohort of about 100 farmers. So technology, is the supply, is there a shortage of supply? Yes. Is there opportunity for everyone to be of benefit? Absolutely. Is there a need for everyone? Is a very good question. I think that, and one that I've asked myself, because I do respect tradition. I respect the craftsmen and the craftswomen that actually bring some of the traditional arts to bear, that have non-computing technology that is used. So, but then I've also seen how we can take some of those traditional crafts or some of those traditional technologies, whether it be hair braiding in many parts of the world, especially in the African tradition, and actually digitize that in order to place it into a historic archive so that tradition is never lost. So is there a shortage? Yes. Does everyone need to be at the table? Absolutely. So we don't make mistakes when we do actually create these algorithms, whether it be in artificial intelligence or whether it be in analysis in machine learning and putting in the right variables to actually analyze. We could go on and on. Everyone should be at the table. Is there a shortage? Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And as you were answering there, with this last one that you mentioned, talking about the farmers and improving the yield, what comes to mind is, I'm not sure how much of a Carl Sagan fanatic you are, but he liked to talk about, the Kardashev scale, and the Kardashev scale is pretty much the roadmap for technology, with the type 1 civilization, type 2 and type 3. And on the type 1, I mean, we're not even on type 1 right now. We're 0.6 to 0.8 of a type 1 civilization, which is basically harnessing all the resources of the planet, so the geography of Earth. And then type 2 is harnessing all of the radiation of the sun, as the cheapest source of energy. And then type 3 would be harnessing the whole galaxy. When you talk about the yield, the yield efficiency, I wonder sometimes, to what extent is, even with the Kardashev scale as a roadmap for technology, to what extent, it seems to me that there's these two main groups as far as humanity is concerned. There's these pro-Earth groups, which I've talked to quite extensively, who, they don't want to hear the Mars situation, they don't want to hear the moon settlements, and they honestly believe that if we can't get it right here on Earth, why in the world are we trying to venture out to other heavenly bodies? What's your opinion on that? Are you fully Earth, or are you wanting to venture out into the rest of the galaxy? And if you want to venture out to the rest of the galaxy, when's the right time to do that? Well, what are the right conditions for life on Earth for us to then take people off of the planet? And for what reason should they move?
That's interesting. That's really, I've never been asked that question before, and I hadn't given it a great deal of thought, but so thank you for the question. It's quite intriguing. I would say I'm more of an earthly being. However, I have a strong curiosity, obviously, right? So, and I've done some work at NASA as a civilian. Interesting, you would ask that. I touched actually is another brief story, but I've touched the needle that actually went up in the Mars project. So it was at the NASA base in Mountain View, California. and the engineers allowed the robotics team that I was overseeing at that point. I was the civilian that started the girls robotics team, um, to actually come in and see the needle as they were putting it into the actual robot. So I believe, so curiosity is always high on my mark. Um, However, I believe that why not work and try to improve the living where we are? It's as though it's seen as the earth may be disposable, and we know that it is not, that is not the case. So conditions here on earth, I believe, would actually continue to deplete. But as you may know, they say that we can actually not completely eradicate some of the damage that we've done over those eras of civilization that I had mentioned earlier, going through the agriculture into the industrial, etc. Eras, that it can't be completely eradicated. However, we can do some reversal on and slow down the process. So I believe very much in not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as they say, and actually being able to utilize the bios and other byproducts that humans actually create, and use that for good, turn those into fuel, as opposed to using fossil fuel. Utilize the natural climate change that we're all experiencing, and the stronger sun intensities, to actually use that for energy. I recall doing some work quite a while ago on hydroelectric energy, and using some of the natural resources as part of our energy along with the sun. So there are many ways in which we could use the existing resources without damaging, um, or continuing to damage the actual planet. Now, whether or not it's something that we should think about, continuing to live the way we live, and we can discard the earth and move on to, ships will leave the earth, and few people would leave on them to go to other planets. That is all suspect. I'm not one to quite feed into that, to be quite honest.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's so much work to do down here. And, until we get things right down here, we shouldn't be spending so much money on just fantasy. There's certainly, cases where we must be aware of what's happening out there. But
Mhm.
sometimes I think it's people get bored. And some people just want to be remembered as the first to do ABC.
Right.
Um,
And it's that curiosity,
exactly.
that behavioral curiosity of individuals that want to achieve, as you said, and be the first, that be the trailblazer, etc.
Exactly.
That I really think that at the end of the day, if you look at what is needed, what we need are food, shelter, and a community.
And
The
free education.
konya is really critical.
And,
Sorry.
and free education in some places. If you think about the tens of billions that go into,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Now, I'm going to ask this question in this way, this next one, because when I talked about Main Street and Wall Street, so the biggest conversation on the Wall Street situation obviously is that principal agent thing. So why do people sell products that they don't use or they don't believe are good? um, Now, someone who wants to make a major investment, or some entity that wants to make a major investment in AI and blockchain, right? So you,
Mhm.
Doc, you approach this person, say, here's this project, it's a massive project, tens of millions, etc. And it can help you in this way. Now, how are you using this is the next question. Can you share some significant use cases where AI and blockchain improve the work that you do for people to say, I'm going to jump onto this thing? I mean, what does it do for you?
Sure. So that really speaks to that adoption and adaption. So in regard to the latest and the greatest topics of blockchain and AI and that use in our company, we actually utilize blockchain as part of our security. Blockchain is merely, and I say this in light, but it is transparency. So as human beings, we actually utilize blockchain whether we know it or not. We've adapted to blockchain. It truly is not a mystery. Now, how its functionality may be a mystery, or its process may be a mystery. The actual systems behind it may be a mystery, but the technology itself is not. Every being on the planet, I could think of very, very few cases, are not engaged in blockchain. So for example, when someone actually makes a purchase and you use a bank card. I remember the first time I used a card as opposed to, and not speaking of, we could speak of credit cards, and we know many countries do not have credit cards, but you may have some type of digital currency transaction that all uses blockchain. That allows for the purchaser to ask its entity, whether it's bank or wherever its institution of currency is held, whether or not they can make that purchase. So that opens a release. If you could actually visualize a lock that's being opened, that's exactly what it does. It says, can I make a purchase of $1 of whatever that may be? And that institution would say, yes, this individual has this dollar to actually make that purchase. So that lock releases, the purchase is queried from that actual buyer to that institution, going vis-a-vis through the actual company or store or service provider. Okay. So if you're in a grocery store, I say, I'm going to buy a yam, and you're at the register purchasing this yam. Then that clerk is ringing up your yam, and that same transaction that I just mentioned is happening between the actual buyer and the seller of that yam. They're checking with the institution to see whether or not you have the funds to purchase that yam. That institution says, yes, they have the funds to purchase this yam. That lock is released. That actual currency is transferred into that seller's culverins, into their bank, and then the lock is closed. So blockchain is utilized, and those are two examples. Blockchain is utilized on a daily basis, every day. And it just shows transparency.
Fantastic.
Now, yes. And so in regard to AI, AI, people think it's a mystery. And I like to think of AI, which is not a new technology. It's actually quite old. It was developed in 1955, I believe. And the technology itself really speaks to process, which is why it's so interesting for me, because I like systems. I moved into looking at, I guess, the economics and looking at the city planning and the engineering side of things as systems, right? So we mentioned that in the very beginning. So artificial intelligence is actually a system, and there's basically 3 areas. And that one area of natural language processing that allows for AI recognition, one way to recognize, is definitely something that most people use. whether or not they sit in their vehicle. For example, they sit in their vehicle and the car says, they used to speak to you, but I think that probably threw off so many people that they took the voice away. But you may hear a dinging now. That's AI. It's still at a pitch, and pitch is part of tone. Or you may say, Siri, you may talk into your phone and say, Siri, call mom, or call a friend. That's still artificial intelligence. Or you may go into your GPS system to try to locate something, and you need it to use a handheld, hand-free device. That's utilization. Or you can ask Alexa to play your favorite music. All of this is natural voice processing, which is artificial intelligence. So if you have an iPhone, you use or some Apple product, you use your fingerprints. Or if you, or your face recognition. And many people use HP type devices where you can have a touch screen. So all of those play into artificial intelligence. So we really have adapted to many of those uses in our everyday lives. And of course, I could share more about how Fairrer Samani Group utilizes these two tools, and that's truly what they are.
Thank you for that, very, very simple and very pragmatic answer. Now the next one is, what value does your work provide to the board of directors or maybe the C-suite?
For my company or for other companies?
So what value would you add to someone's board or the executive management? Yeah.
Yes. And thank you for the question. Absolutely. For our Samani Group, because we are addressing the pain points and the issues of companies and their use of data or their lack of use of data. It's so interesting that many companies that are extremely successful have not utilized their data. Oil and gas, they have a tremendous amount of data that can be diverted into very positive areas of, as you said, education, or the insurance companies, or housing, just with the utilization of some of the data. So what we are able to do is to use the tools that I mentioned, artificial intelligence, as well as blockchain and data transformation, utilize that information to provide business intelligence, meaning that we can give that C-suite or that board the visualization of the health of their company, as well as the prediction and the forecasting of potential existing products or where they could potentially diversify into, as I mentioned in the case of the oil and gas company. So that's basically what we could provide the C-suite or a board of directors, is the visualization, the story that would allow for them to actually make the best business decisions for their organization, whether it be to continue to produce the products they are producing, to divert them into other logistical directions, or to other end users, or to actually innovate and create new products that could be byproducts of their existing products, or to merge and acquisition. So go into acquisition, excuse me. So there are many outcomes that Fairrer Samani Group does actually provide in their data analysis and transformation of data.
Well, now I'm really intrigued on the mergers and acquisitions, but we can arrange an offline discussion for that.
Okay.
Now, I'm someone who I spend a lot of time watching these town hall discussions and even local government meetings on YouTube. I think it's great that some cities, when they have their municipal meetings, they put them up on YouTube. They go live. But unfortunately, even in places like Canada, up to this, to this very day, I think it's a great initiative that they're doing this. They do them live, in the public domain. But when I listen to some of the challenges that local governments face, even in the first world today, I'm just, still at awe at the low rate of adoption of these systems that have been here for so long. Now, say someone from a local government is going to listen, or perhaps if some type of outreach is done, how can municipalities leverage your strategies to better serve their cities? And I'm not again not speaking down on municipalities. I know these are very complex machines, simply because even the consumers of these technologies are cross-generational or multi-generational. So there's the younger people, and then there's the old guard that were selected maybe politically, and they may not be very they may not be very um, easily trainable, in these new technologies.
Mhm.
So I mean, how can you better provide these transformation strategies, I guess, for these complex machines, which are cities, to adopt, these new technologies?
Good question. Well, just to put some statistics to your question, 65 here in the United States, 65% of the federal representatives are baby boomers, and only 7% are Gen Zers, which are millennials between the age of, let's say, 25 to 35, 40. So that in itself speaks to your question of the maturity of the individuals that are sitting in these positions of power, that actually create policy as well as implement policy, or um, defer policy to the states and etc. So that's just speaking on the federal level. So how can we best inform or encourage that adoption of technology is what I believe you were asking, and leveraging strategy as well. So first of all is to leveraging the strategy. I believe knowing your strategy is number one, identifying a key strategy. And again, I like the idea of human-centered design in that concept of going out into the community and actually asking the people what they want. There's that adage of the platinum rule: treat people the way they want to be treated. So if you understand what their needs are and how best to disseminate policy, or how best to allow for individuals to excuse me, adapt various technologies, if you have a better sense of where they are, then you can actually meet them to where they are, or at least allow for there to be a meeting of the minds. And this can be done in various ways. It's very interesting that you would ask this question, because I've actually worked with municipalities to bring about structural change, the movement of a thoroughfare actually to a freeway, which is actually very technical, and it has a lot of attributes of system engagement and community engagement, as well as strategy, definitely strategy involvement. So in that particular case, I, along with the team, actually worked very closely with a charrette and being able to, in a charrette format, where we went right into the community. And I've also done this on military base closures and recommissions as well, many years ago, going into the community and really finding out what their needs were, determining how they want to be treated. How do you want to be seen? Is education an integral part of your community? Is that something that you want? Do you want more free education or low cost education? Are you looking for more grocery stores where there are food deserts in a lot of communities? Are you in need of less liquor stores or less gas stations and more open space and more community centers? So really going to the people and understanding really what their needs are. Now, in regard to the adaptation of this process, it's much more well received by individuals that have been within the culverins of the political structure or the societal development, because you're again not adding in. It may sound low level, and it's very hands-on, but it's a technology, it's a system in which people can engage. And to me, that would provide that compliance is meeting people more of where they are. Then you can bring in more technological aptitudes, such as putting it into an electronic newsletter, being able to have computers and libraries, or putting it out into an alert system that people may see on their phones. So you begin to adapt the information in such a way that the baby boomers could easily gravitate toward and not find it to be too aggressive, and can adapt. And then you can get Gen Zers engaged because they may be also putting together some of the technology behind it. So you have from the end user to the actual developer within the context of really understanding what is needed by the community as a whole. So I believe that answered your question in regard to the shortage and leveraging the actual strategies, as well as making it better for and more compliant with the community, as well as the policymakers.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that human-centered design thinking is the way to go. I had this image in my mind because you were talking about going out into the community and taking surveys and then bringing that information back to inform the strategy, right?
Mm.
So I had this picture in my mind of a group that goes out to do a survey at a sports game, and a bus stops at the stadium, and then they interview people from out of town.
Oh,
They interview people from out of town who talk about their needs, when in fact they're not even locals, and then a wrong system is built on the wrong premise.
oh yes, that's quite often that's the case, right? Because they say, well, do you live in this county? Do you live in this state? You know, when you do
Mm,
have people that do query about various policies or things they want to get on the ballot.
yeah,
So yeah, it's hysterical. That's hysterical. And you begin to wonder, how far would it be any different? I mean, that would be my curiosity would peak to say, is it any different if you live outside of this community? Because they're coming into the community,
mm,
they're reaping some of the benefits, whether it be like at a farmer's market, or you had used the scenario of at a stadium.
yeah,
They're still utilizing the benefit of that location.
yeah,
So if you're developing locally and you want to maintain the input of the locals, um, it may fall short
yeah.
of really gleaning all of the information that is needed. I mean, if you really think about it,
Mm,
because most developments, and we're talking about infrastructure, smart city type developments, are actually looking at IoT from the standpoint of it's a broader band, it's a broader net that you're casting,
mm,
because you do get people that drive through your residence or through your city that you want to meet their needs, and you want the stoplights to stop and be synchronized with the signal lights, and and then we get to the point where in our homes we want everything synchronized, where our phones can actually tell us what we need to purchase from the grocery store, and the refrigerator is telling us what's there and needs to be replenished. So they're not always these localized responses. They actually may be those broader
exactly.
nets that are cast.
Yeah.
So
And now that you
yeah.
talk about it from a long-term investment perspective,
Hmm.
perhaps the needs that are required the most, maybe also the needs of the outsiders, because if you want to make long-term infrastructure investments, you make them with the idea of growing, right?
Right, right,
To service those bonds that would finance those infrastructure investments. And so definitely people from outside that you would like to attract to become permanent
There's-
consumers
right,
of the local economy, their inputs are actually key, because those are the people
right,
you want to attract. 100%. 100%.
right.
Okay, so the last question, um the reason why we have this podcast is, in your opinion, how can technology in general be used to create more happier and more fulfilling cities?
Oh, this is a very biased question.
That
And
is the
perhaps a
whole
very
point.
biased, pardon?
That is the whole point. Yeah, yeah. I'm gathering
And
notes, by the way. So I'm actually breaking them down into clips that I take away from all the interviews, and I always like to listen to all the opinions of why people think technology is awesome. So please do give your very very opinionated answer.
well, that is what you will receive. Absolutely. I was going to say you're going to have a very biased response. I believe that technology is the most amazing aspect of a human being other than one's faith. I really believe that technology allows for us to bring in those aspects of creativity and curiosity and agility and the aptitude of building relationships with not only man and machine, but with individuals, because the machines themselves are programmed by individuals and take after the aptitudes and the characteristics of human beings. So technology to me is a platform in which, or a tool in which we as human beings can benefit from, contribute to, but also benefit from. And if it's done well, if it's done right, then technology should be for all, to glean those benefits, to understand that every individual, every human being within a community, within a jurisdiction, whatever that jurisdiction may be, state or province or region, and within that country and continent, can actually thrive due to technology. And technology is just a means to an end. Technology is a process that we talked about. It's a tool, it's added value that gives us the opportunity to be better, to do better, and to have everything that we need as human beings, with the exception of faith, of course.
Of course, of course. Well, I would like to thank you so much for your inputs on our podcast. And I wish you all the very best. Also, thank you for the work that you're doing for the rest of the world. Because I am very aware that you work, across different regions.